Good evening, one and all present here. I'm Ruba Boukhzam, a master's law student at the Islamic University of Lebanon. You are all in the webinar on International Framework for Dispute Settlement, Theory and Contemporary Practice, organized by Team Licit Elite. Team Licit Elite focuses on providing assistance to law students in self-grooming while acquiring better knowledge by generating an exclusive learning platform through activities like law classes, blog writing, moot proposition drafting competitions, and etc. It also aims to connect with legal experts to design better learning opportunities. It provides lecture series of a subject which is accessible for free at its YouTube channel. Further, on request, it also provides relevant notes in the form of PowerPoint presentations as well as documents or PDF. Licit Elite provides one-on-one digital coaching to law students through video conferencing on the request of the students. The goal of the organization is the ultimate welfare of the students as they are the hope of tomorrow. And Licit Elite invests in future and assists you in practicing your foremost expertise. To throw further light on the topic, we have with us Ms. Manini Siali. Ms. Manini is a visiting assistant professor at Gautam Buddha University, Noida, and is pursuing her PhD from the University School of Law, GGS Indraprastha University, Delhi. She holds an LLM in International Law from the South Asian University. Mom, I would request you to take the session forward and enlighten us all.
Thanks a lot for the kind introduction. Um, can you please assist me in sharing my PPT, please? Because I had already uploaded it and I can't see it now. I hope my PPT is visible now to everyone. And as introduced by the moderator, Ruba, the topic which I'll be covering today is titled International Settlement of Disputes, Theory and Contemporary Development. So I will like to explain the topic a little before starting with the content. In my topic, I'll be explaining both the theory as well as contemporary development associated with international settlement of disputes. And by the word contemporary development, I mean the case laws and the rulings which the international bodies have declared when it comes to international settlement of disputes. And the word contemporary simply means the time period after the United Nations has been constituted in the year 1946. So, international settlement of disputes, as we understand in the contemporary era, in the modern era, is better explained by the theory which has been the practice which has been followed by the United Nations. Prior to constitution of the United Nations, uh, there existed another international organization called League of Nations. But as we all are very much aware, the League of Nations and the Permanent Court of International Justice, which was formed along with the League of Nations, proved to be a failure. And why it proved to be a failure? Because the world witnessed horrendous incidents in the form of World War II, as well as genocide which took place in Germany, as well as war crimes undertaken by Japan in the various uh, Southeast Asian nations, including China. So now let's start with the topic. And when we uh, talk about the term dispute settlement, there are mainly two types of dispute settlement mechanisms which are available internationally. First is amicable or pacific settlement of disputes, which are the legally followed way of dispute settlement, which is the norm when it comes to a, a peace and order uh, focused international order. And the other type of dispute settlement mechanism is compulsive or coercive mechanism, which is not legal at all and which is not something which international community uh, undertakes normally, or it is not something which is liked by the international community. And when we talk about the first type, pacific settlement of disputes, which is the legal type of dispute settlement mechanism, it is a mandate of the United Nations Charter. So any country which is a member of the United Nations, it is mandated to follow Article 33 Pacific Settlement of Dispute Mechanisms. If Article 33 mandate is not being followed, Security Council and General Assembly can take actions against the said country. And let's talk about Article 33 now. Article 33 enumerates a number of peaceful means of dispute settlement, and this is in furtherance of Article 2, Para 3 of the United Nations Charter. Para 3, Article 2 of United Nations Charter lays down one of the key principles upon which United Nations has to function. And it simply states that all members of the United Nations are obligated to settle their international disputes by peaceful means only. And why was this declared to be one of the principles of the United Nations? This I have already discussed a couple of minutes back, because the world community witnessed horrendous incidents in the form of bombings on Nagasaki and Hiroshima, as well as genocide which was taking place in Germany. This particular principle was made the very foundation of the United Nations. And in furtherance of this particular article, we have Article 33, which lays down multiple ways through which countries can settle their dispute pacifically. And this particular provision, Article 33, it is not an option available with the countries. It is an absolutely binding obligation, a legal duty which the countries have to follow. Otherwise, Security Council can take actions against the said country, which is not settling its dispute amicably and is adopting coercive methods. Coercive methods I have already discussed before. It is the second type of dispute settlement. So the preferred mode is, and legal mode is, amicable and pacific. And if the other mode, which is not the preferable mode, is being followed, United Nations organs, mainly the Security Council, can take action against the said country. Now let's talk about the various methods which Article 33 talks about. A while back, I was telling you that Article 33 has incorporated various ways through which countries can settle their disputes. And what are these ways? Negotiation, inquiry, mediation, conciliation, arbitration, judicial settlement, and lastly, resort to regional agencies or arrangements or other peaceful means of their own choice. So these last words, other peaceful means of their own choice, can be interpreted in the way that this article, Article 33, is not an exhaustive provision. The means which have been listed under Article 33, they are only inclusive. They are only suggestive. Countries, if they feel that there is any other way which they can adopt, which can execute the Article 2 mandate, they are free to adopt that means also. So this list is not exhaustive. This is inclusive list. And I will be discussing all these means one by one. Now let's start with the first means, which is negotiations. Before that, I will like to highlight once again what are the pacific settlement means. And broadly, we are dividing these pacific settlement means into two categories: extrajudicial and judicial. Within the extrajudicial category, we have four ways through which countries can settle their disputes: negotiation, good offices and mediation, conciliation, inquiry. So these are extrajudicial methods. No judicial body is deciding disputes using these methods. And on the other hand, we have judicial methods, namely arbitration and International Court of Justice. And all these are pacific methods, which is the preferred mode as given under Article 33. And once again, I would like to highlight that all these means are legally binding means. Countries have to, at any cost, use any one of these means whenever an international dispute occurs between them. And this particular principle has also been observed by the International Court of Justice in one of the landmark rulings called Military and Paramilitary Activities in and against Nicaragua case. So this case is called generally Nicaragua case, and International Court of Justice has clearly stated that enshrined in the Article 33 of UN Charter, which also indicates a number of peaceful means which are available, this principle has also attained the status of customary international law. So in this case, what is court doing? Court itself is clarifying the fact that Article 33 is absolutely mandatory in nature. It is so important, this particular provision, Article 33, that it has attained the status of customary international law. And I hope everybody here knows what customary international law means. So if there is any question, I would clarify it later after the lecture. But for now, I would once again like to repeat that Article 33 has become so important that it has attained the status of customary international law. It has become binding even on those countries which are not a party of the United Nations Charter. So this is the status of Article 33, Pacific Settlement of Dispute. And what are the two ways? Once again, I am repeating, given under Article 33, extrajudicial ways and judicial ways. Now let's come to the first extrajudicial mode, negotiation. And I am sure when it comes to domestic law, all of you must have studied these different modes of dispute settlement, which are commonly called alternative dispute resolution mechanisms, available under domestic legal mechanisms. And they are also available when it comes to international law. And here I am only talking in terms of international law. So now let's start with the first mode, that is negotiation. And what is the characteristic feature of negotiation? That negotiation is the dispute settlement mechanism wherein two countries are directly coming together and trying to resolve the dispute amicably by discussing things amongst each other. Dispute settlement of this kind happens without intervention of anyone. So the countries are directly engaging, directly talking and trying to clarify the dispute. And what we do for this type of dispute resolution mechanism, the simplest form of why because no other party is getting involved. There is no interference here. There is slight disturbance coming. Can you, the moderator, can you please stop the hindrance, please, if possible? Okay. So I am resuming once again. We were talking about negotiations, and what was the key characteristic of negotiation? That this is the simplest type of dispute resolution mechanism. And what happens when it comes to negotiations? The two parties to the dispute are coming together, discussing things amongst each other, and are trying to resolve the dispute. And the entire negotiation mechanism depends upon degree of acceptability of parties of terms. How far the parties are ready to accept the terms by discussing it amongst themselves alone is the very important foundation stone of negotiation. When it comes to negotiation, there is no convention available. There is no treaty available. However, in the year 1998, General Assembly of the United Nations has given certain guidelines which the countries can use for negotiating with one another. And let's read a few of those guidelines. First of all, negotiations should be conducted in good faith. And good faith is also one of the objectives and principles of the United Nations Charter. And this has been reiterated. This has been repeated in these guidelines also. That whenever countries are coming together, they are trying to resolve their dispute through negotiations, they have to come with a good faith. Now let's come to the second thing. States must take due account of the importance of engaging in an appropriate manner in negotiations, the state whose vital interests are directly affected by the matter in question. Third, States must adhere to the mutually agreed framework for conducting negotiations. Fourth, states should remain focused on the main objective while undertaking the negotiation. And lastly, mutually acceptable and just solution should remain the focus of the state. So all these guidelines, all these points simply are trying to state that uh, the interest of both the countries, both the parties to this dispute are to be taken into consideration while negotiating. And there should always be a bona fide intent in the minds of the states prior to negotiating. And once again, I am repeating that these are mere guidelines. These are not conventions or treaties which are absolutely binding on the countries. Countries are free whether or not they want to follow these guidelines. However, these guidelines, they are of utmost importance because General Assembly itself has given these guidelines. And since there is no binding mechanism available, countries who are trying to resolve disputes, who are trying to adopt the simplest means, that is negotiations, can freely use these guidelines while conducting negotiations. Now let's talk about what are the shortcomings of negotiations. Positive points I have already highlighted, that negotiations are the simplest means because there is no third party. Third party is not there to dictate terms on the countries. Countries are coming with good faith, they are discussing things and trying to settle the dispute. However, what happens at times, there might be one party who is more powerful. For instance, there is a dispute existing between India and Bangladesh. It is obvious that India is a more powerful country in comparison to Bangladesh. So if there is no third party, India will try to put its point more prominently. It will be in a better bargaining position in comparison to Bangladesh. So at times this is a problem which occurs during negotiations. Another problem which might occur during negotiations is that negotiation is not always done freely, and at times the treaty existing between parties might compel them to undertake negotiations, or tribunals might ask parties to undertake negotiations. So this simply means that negotiations are not as free as they appear to be. It might appear that they are undertaken in good faith, or it might appear that countries on their own are coming together and negotiating. They are talking amongst each other. However, at times, negotiation is something which is arbitrarily imposed upon the countries. Countries are at times forced to undertake negotiations. So they are not as free as they appear to be. Now let's come to a few successful examples of negotiations. Where negotiations, the simplest means, where there is no strict procedure, has proved to be a great success in amicably, pacifically settling disputes. One example is that between India and Pakistan, wherein India and Pakistan settled their dispute pertaining to Bangladesh in the Shimla Conference, and a treaty was signed. And this happened only because of negotiations. Another example is 1974 boundary dispute settled between India and Sri Lanka by negotiation. The third example is Farakka Barrage dispute, which was settled between India and Bangladesh in the year 1977. So, it won't be wrong to state that negotiations, which does not involve any technicality as such, can also prove to be a great success when it comes to settling international disputes. Now let's come to the second type of amicable dispute settlement mechanism, which is non-judicial in nature. The second type of non-judicial dispute settlement mechanism is good offices and mediation. And I have listed good offices and mediation together here. Even though they are two different types of non-judicial dispute settlement mechanism, we can club these two together because of their similarities. Mediation and good offices are diplomatic methods of dispute settlement involving third parties. In negotiations, there was no third party at all. Countries together come and solve the dispute by discussing things. Simple discussions are taking place. There is no complex procedure involved in negotiation. But in good offices and mediation, What is the difference? A third party is coming. A third party is trying to settle the dispute, trying to bring the two countries together to settle the dispute. And this third party can either be a single country, a group of state, an individual, an organ of a universal or regional international organization, or a joint body. And you people must have heard that at times the Secretary General of the United Nations himself offers good offices to countries who are fighting amongst each other. So to avoid a war-like situation, United Nations itself offers its good offices. Or at times what happens? A country might offer good offices. Like Russia offered good offices between India and Pakistan, and this good office resulted in a particular treaty, Tashkent Treaty. So what is happening? Another country is coming between two fighting countries and is trying to settle dispute here. Now let's talk about mediation. In mediation also, just like good offices, another country is involved. But what happens in case of mediation? The third party is taking a more active role in comparison to good office. The role of a country or a organization providing good offices is limited to bringing the two fighting countries together. The role of the third country, the third party, stops there. But in mediation, the third party actively engages. It sits together with the two fighting countries and tries to resolve the dispute. So the role here becomes more active. And what is the similarity between good offices and mediation, because of which we are clubbing these two together? A third party is coming and helping the countries in deciding dispute. And this element was absent when it comes to negotiation, the first type of non-judicial method. Now let's talk about the difference between good offices and mediation categorically in clear terms. Good office method is where the third party offers good offices to the conflicting states to facilitate dialogue and assist states toward peaceful settlement of dispute. Mediation involves more active third party participation in the negotiation. The mediator conducts the negotiation between contending parties on the basis of proposal made by the mediator aimed at a mutually acceptable compromise solution. So what is happening in mediation? Parties are not deciding the dispute amongst each other. The third party is dictating certain terms which are mutually acceptable. But in good offices, the next step would be negotiation, which was the first kind of dispute resolution mechanism, which we have already discussed. So good offices can be one step prior to negotiation. But ultimately, the third party is not dictating terms. The countries are deciding disputes amongst each other. So this is the difference. This is the categorical difference between good offices and mediation. Now let's discuss certain examples, certain successful examples, in fact, wherein good offices prove to be helpful in settling dispute. One example is the good offices given by the World Bank between India and Pakistan, which resulted in Indus Water Treaty. Indus Water Treaty is a very successful international treaty. And why is it so much successful? Because everybody knows that India and Pakistan, it is very difficult to bring these two countries together on one issue. But when it comes to Indus Water River sharing, good offices provided by World Bank and further mediation services provided by good World Bank also proved to be great success. And till date, this treaty is continuing. There are certain conflicts which time and again keep on arising pertaining to Indus Water Treaty between India and Pakistan. But since the year 1960 till date, it has been successfully continuing, and it has been successfully governing the water sharing arrangement between India and Pakistan. Another example of mediated dispute is the Israel-Jordanian bilateral negotiations, which were combined with informal discussions where American and Russian diplomats acted as mediators, which resulted in the 1994 Treaty of Peace between Israel and Jordan. So, through all these examples, it won't be wrong to state that simple means of dispute resolution, like mediation, like good office, like negotiations, they are proving to be of great success, despite absence of a strict procedure, despite absence of a judicial way of settling dispute, which is usually the preferred mode. Countries usually think that it is better to approach a court because there would be a binding decision coming out. But all these instances, all these examples are sufficient to show that without following strict legal procedure also disputes can be settled, because ultimate intent is to ensure a peace and order oriented international uh, community, international society, which was also the mandate of the United Nations. And why was it the mandate of United Nations? This we have already discussed at least twice, because the ultimate intent was to avoid instances like Hiroshima Nagasaki bombing, World War II, and German genocide. Now let's come to another type of non-judicial dispute settlement mechanism, which is conciliation. Conciliation has been defined in resolution of the Institut des Droits International in the year 1961 as a method of dispute settlement of any nature according to which a commission set up by the parties, either on a permanent basis or an ad hoc basis, to deal with the dispute, proceed to the impartial examination of the dispute, and attempts to define the terms of a settlement susceptible of being by them or of affording the parties, with a view to its settlement, such aid as they may have requested. So, what is happening in case of conciliation? If I explain it in simple words, in conciliation, one conciliation commission is being established. One expert body is being established. In case of mediation, in case of good offices, countries were there which were offering their mediation services or good offices. But in conciliation, an expert commission has been constituted. And countries usually like to formulate conciliation commissions in environmental disputes, in trade related disputes, where the nature of the dispute is highly technical, where an expert is required to give assistance. And on the basis of the report of the conciliation commission, the dispute is settled by the two countries. So this has even more importance. This becomes even more important because of the technicality involved. Because an expert is drawing a report which will become the ground for settling the dispute. This is why conciliation is slightly different from the previously discussed non-judicial ways. That is negotiation, that is good offices, that is mediation. Now let's talk about inquiry. The fifth way. Inquiry is similar to conciliation. But in case of inquiry, the inquiry or fact-finding commission is independent. Countries themselves aren't formatting the inquiry or fact-finding commission the way in conciliation it was occurring. In conciliation also, one expert body is formulated which goes on ground, which collects data, and on the basis of that data, the dispute is settled by the countries. In inquiry, a similar thing is happening. Ground level fact finding will take place by an expert committee, but this expert committee is independent and usually formulated by a third party, primarily the United Nations. United Nations mandated commissions of inquiry and fact finding are increasingly being used to respond to situations of serious violations of international humanitarian law and international human rights law. A while back, when I was talking about conciliation, I had told you people that in conciliation, usually the nature of the dispute is that of environmental law or trade law. But in inquiry, international humanitarian law or international human rights law is usually involved. It is undertaken when there is some genocide taking place or wherein there is some war crime taking place. Inquiry happens usually in those cases. And the purpose of inquiry or fact finding is to promote accountability for such violations. That no country escapes by simply undertaking some human rights violation. Or if a country is violating humanitarian law, it cannot escape. This is the main intent of formulating inquiry or fact finding commission. So international investigative bodies have been established by Security Council, General Assembly, Human Rights Council, its predecessor, the Commission on Human Rights, time and again for settling disputes pertaining to human rights as well as humanitarian law by using inquiry or fact-finding commission. And in recent years also, this has become quite popular. And you people must have studied this, you people must have noticed this in the case of Gambia versus Myanmar, the popular Rohingya refugee case. In the year 2017, what happened? A human rights catastrophe occurred in the northern Rakhine state of Myanmar. And the military itself was involved in this genocide, in this mass killing, which resulted in mass migration from Myanmar to the neighboring countries, Bangladesh, India, etc. And in the countries where these refugees had migrated to, they further had to suffer a lot on the hands of the receiving countries. So finally, Gambia, which had absolutely nothing to do with this dispute, filed a case before the International Court of Justice. And what happened here? One independent fact-finding commission was constituted, especially for doing ground level reporting, for collecting information from the ground level. And very important information has been collected by this particular inquiry commission, by this particular fact-finding commission in the Rakhine state. And this committee, this fact-finding commission went to various countries, went to Myanmar, it went to India, it went to Nepal, it went to Bangladesh. It conducted large number of interviews, and finally it was declared in the report of this particular commission that the senior general Min Aung Hlaing, who was the commander-in-chief of the Myanmar army since 2011, was directly involved in the genocide of Rohingya which was taking place there. Tatmadaw, which is the armed forces of Myanmar, played an active role, and it proved to be a perpetrator of gross human rights violation. All these facts, all these pictures, all these posters I have taken from the official website of this independent international fact-finding mission. All this data, the entire report is easily available online. You people can go through it. But this shows how important inquiry can prove to be when it comes to settling international disputes. And at times, international fact-finding commissions suggest ground level reforms in the form of accountability mechanisms and strengthening legislation. So one fact-finding mission had also gone to Nepal. After civil unrest took place in Nepal, the government was overthrown in Nepal a couple of times. And finally, it was decided by United Nations that Nepal needs to review its entire legal framework. And one fact-finding commission was sent here. You can see one picture of also here of that fact-finding commission. So ground level reporting is done by such fact-finding commission. So what is the difference between conciliation and fact-finding or inquiry commissions? These fact-finding inquiry commissions are independent in nature. The country to dispute itself is not constituting the fact-finding commission like the way it was occurring in conciliation. United Nations or other organs of the United Nations formulate these fact-finding commissions. We have already seen two examples of fact-finding commission. One is UN Independent National Fact-Finding Commission on Myanmar, and another one was the Fact-Finding Commission sent to Nepal. The third Fact-Finding Commission is that which was sent to Republic of Korea in the year 2013. And we can clearly see the mandate of this particular commission in the following words. The Commission of Inquiry will investigate systematic, widespread, and grave violations of human rights in the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, including violation of right to food, violations associated with prison camps, torture and inhumane treatment, arbitrary detention, discrimination, etc. In particular, where these violations may amount to crime against humanity. So this is the mandate of this commission. This was the purpose of constituting this commission. And finally, a report was submitted and action was taken against Republic of Korea in the form of sanctions imposed by the Security Council. So we can also conclude that fact-finding commissions have also proved to be great success. And in case of Myanmar also, making this report submitted by the commission the base, International Court of Justice decided to initiate the case, even though Gambia had filed the case. But finally, there was sufficient data to prove that Myanmar RP was directly involved, and a valid claim is there from the side of Gambia, and this case is still going on. So this was all about non-judicial type of dispute settlement mechanism. Now let's come to the second type, judicial settlement. The first type I have already discussed. I had demarcated the dispute settlement mechanism into two types, judicial and non-judicial. Non-judicial, I am once again repeating, are of mainly 5 types: negotiations, mediation, conciliation, good offices, and lastly, fact-finding missions. Now let's come to judicial method of dispute resolution taking place internationally. And these are further of 2 types, arbitration and judicial dispute settlement through International Court of Justice, which is the primary dispute resolving body constituted under the mandate of the United Nations. Now let's start with the first type, arbitration. Arbitration is a process used by the agreement of the parties to resolve disputes. So what is happening here? Countries which are the parties to the dispute, they are of the opinion that soft types like negotiation, mediation, fact-finding, etc., they are not proving to be successful because there is no strict mechanism, there is no strict procedure there. There is no arbitrator which will follow some rule of law based principle to decide dispute. So what is happening? An arbitral panel is being constituted to resolve dispute. In arbitration, disputes are resolved with binding effect by a person or persons acting in a judicial manner in private rather than by a national court of law that would have jurisdiction but for the agreement of the parties to exclude it. The decision of the arbitral tribunal is usually called an award. So what is happening here? One panel is being constituted by the countries to dispute themselves, which is not a national level panel. It is an international level panel only, and it will follow international law to decide dispute, but the proceedings will take place in private. It won't be an open hearing type of arrangement. And once the decision has been given, it will be called an award, which is binding in nature. The results of non-judicial dispute settlement is not binding. When it comes to negotiation, negotiation, mediation, good offices, fact-finding, conciliation, the award, the final decision is not binding on parties as such. They were only political ways of settling disputes, where diplomats are sitting together and deciding. No legal principle is compulsorily to be followed by the countries to dispute. But once an arbitral panel is being formed, some legal principles are obligated to be complied with while giving the arbitral award. there is some procedure which has to be followed. Even though in arbitration, the arbitrators are appointed by the parties themselves, still the award is binding. So there is some relaxation which is being provided to the parties in terms of choosing the arbitrators, choosing the seat of the arbitration panel, and thirdly, choosing the procedure to be followed. But this procedure, once settled that it will be followed, it becomes absolutely binding on the countries to be followed. And there is no escape here. Unlike litigation, arbitration takes place out of court. The two sides select an impartial third party known as an arbitrator, agree in advance to comply with the arbitrator's award, and then participate in a hearing at which both sides can present evidence and testimony. The arbitrator's decision is usually final and courts rarely re-examine it. Traditionally, labor and commerce are the two largest areas of arbitration. And one recent case also of arbitration which has recently come in news, which has become popular, is that between Amazon and Reliance. And the matter went before the Singapore Arbitral Tribunal, Singapore Arbitration Panel. And the Singapore Arbitral Court, the panel, has decided in favor of Amazon in future retail, in favor of future retail. So once again, I am repeating the facts of this case. Future Retail, that is Big Bazaar, which is an Indian company, it entered into an agreement between Amazon that whenever Future Retail will formulate another contract, it will first consult Amazon. But Reliance on the Indian platform, Indian economic platform, overtook substantial shares of Future Retail without consulting Amazon. So Amazon went before the Singapore Arbitration Commission arbitral panel and filed a case against Reliance, stating that this acquisition had taken place without consulting Future Retail, without consulting Amazon. And finally, the award was given in favor of Amazon. It was stated by the Singapore Arbitration Tribunal that Reliance had arbitrarily acquired the shares of Future Retail, and till the time the final dispute is not settled, status quo should be maintained. However, in violation of this, going totally against this award, the Indian Competition Commission has given another decision, which is totally in contradiction to this award. So this is altogether a different matter. A lot of politics is also involved in this matter, and we need not go in that much detail. So the only point to be noted here is that in case of arbitration, there is a binding award. Parties themselves can choose the arbitrators which will decide the case, but some rule of law based principles are to be abided with. Now let's come to the second type of judicial settlement of dispute, which is trial before the International Court of Justice, before other international tribunals like ITLOS, like European Court of Justice, like European Court of Human Rights, and the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, including certain ad hoc tribunals like United Nations Tribunal in Libya. So settlement of dispute which is happening absolutely in a judicial way need not only take place before the International Court of Justice. There are other internationally constituted courts as well, which are usually specialized in nature, like the tribunal formulated under United Nations Convention on Law of Seas, or the court formulated under European Human Rights Treaty or American Human Rights Treaty. And at times, certain ad hoc tribunals are also formulated. ICJ, ITLOS, ECJ, ECHR, all these, they are permanent in nature. However, when we talk about tribunals like United Nations Tribunal in Libya or the tribunal formulated for Yugoslavia, or the tribunal formulated for Nuremberg, or the tribunal formulated for Tokyo trials, all these are ad hoc in nature. They were formulated to decide a single dispute at hand. You people must have watched Tokyo Trials, a series which recently released on Netflix. It has become very popular. And if you people haven't watched it, I would recommend that you watch it. It is very important for understanding how exactly ad hoc tribunals used to function. Now the practice of constituting ad hoc tribunals has largely stopped. Countries usually prefer to go before the International Court of Justice or before the International Criminal Court, which are permanent bodies, unlike these ad hoc tribunals, which are formulated for deciding a single dispute at hand. And when it comes to specialization might be that of a particular field of international law as well, like International Tribunal for Law of Seas, ITLAS. It has been constituted to exclusively decide law of seas related issues. International Court of Justice is versatile in nature. Any dispute pertaining to any issue on public international law, countries are free to go before International Court of Justice. However, when any law of sea related matter comes up, countries usually prefer to go before International Tribunal for the Law of Seas. So once again, let's revise what exactly judicial dispute resolution mechanism internationally existing entail: arbitration and courts. When we talk about arbitration, procedure can be decided by parties themselves. Secondly, arbitrators are also decided by parties themselves. So there is some flexibility when it comes to arbitration. But when it comes to courts, there is no flexibility when it comes to electing the judges of the courts. The judges are elected by the court itself. The parties simply go and file the complaint. And ultimately, it is the court itself which decides which judge will hear the dispute. And secondly, the procedure of the court is also not flexibly available. The court itself dictates the procedure. For instance, when we talk about International Court of Justice, the procedure to be followed by the court is strictly mentioned in the Statute of ICJ, which is an annexure agreement to the United Nations Charter. Parties themselves will not dictate what exactly the procedure will be. So this is the difference between arbitration and courts. And courts can be of two types: permanent courts like ICJ, ITLAS, that is International Tribunal for Law of Seas, WTO, that is World Trade Organization, or International Court of Justice. Or these international courts can be ad hoc in nature also, like Tokyo Tribunal, like Nuremberg Tribunal, which were formulated for some time alone for deciding a special issue at hand. Coming back to ICJ, International Court of Justice is one of the principal judicial organs of the United Nations, and all parties of the United Nations Charter are ipso facto, that is automatically party to the International Court of Justice. Judges of ICJ are appointed by United Nations, not by the parties to a dispute, and this is the difference between arbitration and judicial way of settling dispute, that judges are not voluntarily chosen by the parties. Rules to be applied, that is the law to be followed by the International Court of Justice, has been defined under Article 38 of the Statute of the Court. Article 38 of the statute states that International Court, while settling the dispute, can either utilize international treaties, conventions, agreements. Second, it can apply international customary law. Third, it can apply general principles of law recognized by civilized nations. Lastly, it can apply its previous rulings and the works of the most prominent international scholars. But when we talk about the rulings of the court, there is no strict rule of precedent which is enforceable, which is binding upon the International Court of Justice. This is a primary difference between dispute settlement taking place at the domestic level and international level. When disputes are being settled domestically, rule of precedent, that is previous rulings of the courts, higher courts especially, is absolutely binding in nature. No lower court can derogate from a previous ruling of a higher court. However, this principle of precedent does not find a place when it comes to international law. Precedents are a subsidiary or secondary source of international law as defined under Article 38. I am not going too much into Article 38, which talks about the subjects, which talks about the sources of international law. It is a very big topic. It requires a special lecture on its own. So we are not going much into Article 38. I am only mentioning it prima facie. On surface level mention is sufficient over here. Now let's talk about jurisdiction of international court. I was a while back referring that every country which is a party to the United Nations Charter, ipso facto, that is automatically becomes a party to International Court of Justice's statute. However, consent is required on a case-to-case basis when it comes to settling dispute by International Court of Justice. So I would like to explain this particular concept using one example. So for example, a dispute is occurring between America and Nicaragua. Both America and Nicaragua, they are parties to the United Nations Charter. So ipso facto, they are becoming a party to the International Court of Justice also. But if a dispute is arising, suppose on 21st December 2020, special consent is once again required to be rendered by both the countries for the court to hear this matter. The consent which was given in the year 1946 by signing the UN Charter is not sufficient. Consent is required to be given on a case-to-case basis. Every time a case arises, for qualifying that case within the jurisdiction of the court, specialized consent is required. And this was about the jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice. But what about the subject matter jurisdiction of International Court of Justice? So any dispute pertaining to interpretation of a treaty, any question of international law, any question of existence of any fact constituting breach of international obligations, and the nature or extent of reparation to be made for the breach of an international organization of an international obligation can be heard by the International Court of Justice. So this can be called a very versatile court when it comes to subject matter jurisdiction. Unlike ITLAWs, unlike WTO, unlike International Criminal Court, these are specialized judicial bodies. But International Court of Justice's subject matter jurisdiction is pretty wide. It is as wide as possible. Any question of international law can be heard by International Court of Justice. But there is only one thing which has to be kept in mind, that consent is required for each and every case which comes before the International Court of Justice. This was all about dispute settlement which takes place between parties themselves. Now let's talk about another type of Pacific settlement of dispute resolution. And here parties themselves are not giving consent for settlement of dispute. If the United Nations organs, mainly the Security Council and the General Assembly, feel that countries have failed to resolve the dispute amongst themselves, they have failed to follow the Article 33 methods, institutional method of dispute resolution might take place. because Security Council and General Assembly, they are the organs which have primarily been formulated to ensure that there is non-occurrence of any form of international violence once again at the international level. If any violence takes place, what will happen? The very purpose for which the United Nations was formulated will get frustrated, which had happened in the case of League of Nations. And we will have to reconsider the entire international law mechanism once again. So, as a second safeguard, as a second level safeguard, institutional method of dispute resolution have also been incorporated within the United Nations Charter. Institutional methods of dispute settlement involve the resort to international organization for settlement of international dispute. These methods have come into existence with the creation of international organizations. Settlement of international disputes is one of the most important role of United Nations. Charter of United Nations stipulate that it is the task of United Nations to bring about by peaceful means and in conformity with the principles of justice and international law, adjustment or settlement of international dispute or situations which might lead to a breach of peace. So we have non-judicial methods like negotiation, mediation, etc. If parties fail to settle dispute by these political means, what is the next resort? Legal dispute resolution mechanism or judicial dispute resolution mechanism by ICJ or by specialized tribunals like ICLAWS, ICC, etc. However, if countries are still not settling the disputes, if there is still a fight ongoing between the countries, if some warlike situation is about to occur, if countries are about to use force against each other, now the Security Council and the General Assembly step in. And this is what the institutional mechanism of dispute resolution simply means. Security Council has the role of ultimately ensuring peace and security at the international level. It is like the teeth of United Nations. It is the executory organ of the United Nations. And Security Council has been empowered to impose sanctions upon countries to amicably settle dispute. If countries are not abiding by the decision of the International Court of Justice, if they are not abiding by the decision of some arbitral tribunal or negotiation mediation has also failed, now Security Council will use force against those countries. That force can either be military force or it can also be economic type of force. And we should not underestimate economic sanctions. In the present day, economic sanctions have become as important as military sanctions. And it is very interesting to note that United Nations has a peacekeeping force of its own, UN peacekeeping forces. And whenever Security Council feels that there is a war-like situation prevailing in any country, these forces are deployed there to maintain peace and orderly conduct of international society. So this was all about the various type of international dispute resolution mechanism. And once again, I would like to repeat that these mechanisms, they are absolutely binding in nature. And it is a mandate of Article 33. And the word used under Article 33 is shall. So countries are not free to use force against each other. International law is mandating that at any cost, you have to adopt peaceful dispute resolution mechanism. Otherwise, Security Council sanctions would be imposed upon countries. And as stated by the ICJ under the Nicaragua judgment, Article 33 has also attained the status of customary international. So this was all about this topic. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mom, so much for enlightening us with your words of wisdom. We hope that all participants have gained good knowledge on this topic. We have received many questions from our participants, and I would like to set some of them. First question: Do you think these methods of pacific settlement of disputes are a piece of ornamentation?
I personally feel that in a large number of cases, especially the Nicaragua judgment, ultimately it is international politics which prevails. The hegemonic countries like the United States, they are free to decide uh, everything in furtherance of their domestic political order. So ultimately, the countries which are the most powerful ones, they disregard the entire Article 33 altogether and do what they think is best for themselves. This has happened in the Nicaragua judgment. This has time and again happened, especially in the form of Vietnam War, in the form of Afghanistan War, in the form of the Korean War, etc.
Okay. Second question, if countries don't settle their disputes peacefully, can Security Council take unpeaceful action against them just to encourage peaceful resolution?
So it would be wrong to call the Security Council measures to be non-peaceful. Everything which the Security Council does is in furtherance of rule of law. Security Council is also bound by the United Nations Charter. So whatever powers the United Nations Charter is giving to the Security Council, it can only act in furtherance of those powers. It cannot go beyond that. However, there are certain bodies like the NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which has been formed by North Atlantic countries like America, Canada, etc. And at times, unlawfully also, these countries uh, take certain measures which are outside the purview of the United Nations Charter.
Okay, mom. Third question. In 1951, Australia offered to provide their services of good offices to the dispute pertaining to India Pakistan. However, both the countries rejected the proposition. What is the sanctity of this chapter of UN Charter if inordinate discretionary power has been given to the nation states?
See, the thing is that I was mentioning this before also. I would like to repeat this again that non-judicial methods, countries have the maximum flexibility available whether or not they want to opt for them. So if Australia was offering its good offices and India and Pakistan uh, rejected it, nobody can force India and Pakistan to uh, compulsorily abide by what Australia is saying. However, if some war-like situation is prevailing, if India and Pakistan are trying to use force against each other, in that situation, Security Council can step in. Because the ultimate intent of formulating Security Council was to ensure that there is absolute peace and security prevailing at the international level.
Okay, mom. The last question. Why conciliation is used on cases involving environmental law?
Okay. So the nature of conciliation is such that an expert body is constituted which will go and do fact finding on the ground level. In environmental cases, usually conciliation is the preferred mode because the nature of environmental law is very technical. We need environmental data to.
Mom, you are mute. Please.
Am I audible?
Yes, now you are again.
Yeah. So I was saying that the nature of environmental disputes is such that it is highly technical in nature. So we need ground level data to support the decisions which we are taking. This is why in environmental disputes, conciliation is the preferred mode because expert committees are formulated which will go and do ground level reporting.
Okay, Mom, we're done. Thank you so much for such a vibrant session. I would like also to thank all participants for joining us. You may find a recorded version of this session on our YouTube channel. Please stay safe, stay healthy. See you all soon.
Thank you so much.